do you see the present state of the planet? In social terms, environmental terms, the overall picture, how do you sort of assess things?
I'm actually incredibly hopeful right now about the state of the planet, which I think some people find surprising given the work that I do. But I've had the opportunity in the last couple of years to see more change, more positive change in a number of different countries around the world than I think I've seen in the last 20. You know, we're living in a time when we talk a lot about the challenge that we face as a result of global warming pollution, for example, and it is a massive challenge. Yet, at the same time, the last 2 years were the first years in human history where new investment in renewable, clean, safe technologies like solar and wind for electricity exceeded new investment in coal, oil, and nuclear combined. You know, we're actually living right now a tipping point where we are re-envisioning industrial society and how we live on the planet. And I think that's incredibly exciting.
And I guess that's what has to happen. Really, the people in charge, which is the business world, has to sort of really get involved for things to change. Is that how you see things? Is that where your focus is, these?
Well, there's no question that the investment community, the banking community, the business community, corporate leaders have to be involved in the change that needs to happen. You know, but at the same time, I think there's also no question that we need government decision makers to create the rules of the game. You know, we need the laws that are going to protect us and the air we breathe and the water we drink. And the other systems will operate within those laws. But I think most important in terms of who needs to act is us, right? Our government officials work for us. You know, we vote them in. And I think the most concerning trend that I see is the lack of engagement from our youth today, from us. You know, when I grew up, we spent our weekends volunteering. You know, I spent my weekends volunteering at the synagogue. You know, I taught kids how to cook and seniors how to make jewelry, and, you know, knocked on doors to raise money for various causes. It was part of what we did. You know, we engaged in our community. You know, our kids today spend their weekends at the mall like it's a pastime. You know, I think we have this kind of completely overdeveloped consumption muscle and an underdeveloped civic engagement muscle. You know, we need to see engaging with our community, with our decision makers, our members of parliament, you know, our elected officials, as something that we do every day.
Well, that's actually part of the curriculum now. For high school students, they have to have a certain amount of volunteer hours. So I guess it's kind of moving along that vein, I would say.
I hope so, but I think I know I'm worried by some of the kids that I've met with over the last couple of years. You know, I'll never forget being at the United Nations climate change negotiations in Copenhagen and meeting with the youth delegation there, and they were. It was interesting, you know, often I meet with groups of people and you have to talk to them about climate change and global warming and explain what's happening, and, you know, especially with you know, some older groups in North America, you know, you still have to, well, you know, the science is not there, you have to talk about the science. You meet with youth and they know what's happening. They know about it and they're angry. They don't need to be convinced that there's something that they need to worry about the state of the earth today. They need to be convinced that they can make a difference. You know, and these are kids that have made their way to the United Nations Climate Change Conference, but they were disheartened and they were burnt out. And, you know, as a Canadian, I think one of the most horrifying things was they were all ripping the Canadian flags off their backpacks because they were so embarrassed to be Canadian on an international stage.
What do you think is the most pressing issue worldwide?
There is no question that the most pressing issue facing our survival is how we're going to turn the lights on, how we're going to transport ourselves. Because the energy system that we've created over the last 50 to 100 years is completely unsustainable and it's unsafe. We're seeing that from the disaster, the oil spill in the Gulf, to the nuclear disaster in Fukushima. We're seeing that by the fact that we're experiencing a 50% increase in violent storms globally around the world, you know, just since 1970. You know, there are 10 million more people today than there were last year who don't have access to clean water and food in countries in Africa because of the impacts of climate change. The most pressing issue facing us today is the fact that we have carbon building up in our atmosphere, and it is literally creating a heat-trapping blanket. It is smothering the planet, and that's creating unpredictable weather patterns, a dramatic increase of floods and storms. And the thing is, you know, you think about those people who are experiencing the impacts today, who have lost their homes. You know, the United Nations says more people today lose their homes as a result of climate change than war. And people often say to me, look, it's the most pressing issue. This is a tragedy. But a tragedy is a problem that doesn't have a solution. We have a solution to addressing the unsustainability of our energy systems, to addressing the carbon problem. There are solutions. We have the technology today to create clean, safe energy systems. So climate change is not a tragedy. A problem that has a solution that's not being acted upon is a scandal. So what we're dealing with is a scandal, and the scandal is that governments and corporations have the technology to protect us and ensure that more people don't lose their homes or have a lack of access to basics like water and food, but they're not acting upon it.
What are the forces at play here? Describe how you see it, the forces that are keeping things as they are and the forces that are acting for change.
I think that there's no question that what's holding us back is in large part profit margins. You know, there are a very small number of people on the planet who are making an enormous amount of money and who are very invested in the infrastructure that we've developed for fossil fuel energy, and you know, that it's no more clear than just looking at the balance sheets. You know, Shell made $1 billion last month in profits alone. Yet here in Canada, we gave the oil industry $2.9 billion in the last year and a half in tax breaks and subsidies of taxpayers' money. You know, and so that's the system that continues to support the development of fossil fuels, despite the fact that we know that it's killing us. And so there are a small amount of very vested interest, big companies and big corporate associations who are literally funding false science to question the state of climate change, who are funding politicians and who are funding lobby efforts and trying to create what we call astroturf campaigns, so-called community campaigns to oppose the development of clean energy, solar panels and wind farms, and those companies and those associations are what's holding us back. And I think the most important thing for us to do right now is to ensure that our politicians listen to the people and not the polluters.
Just from your book, one of the most powerful things I read in your book was when they tried to sort of make a deal with you for the Commonwealth Games, right? I thought that was very, very, very. I think that more people should know about that kind of thing. That really, everything's a bargaining chip.
Yeah.
And maybe it's as you say, they're just acting as sort of liaison between business interests. Can you describe a situation like what it's like in the back rooms dealing with government?
So I think when I started this work, I was fairly naive. You know, I assumed that I might not agree with the choice the government was making, but the government was operating on behalf of the people, and that when I started, I was campaigning against clear-cut logging in Canada's rainforest. And I really did think, you know, my fight was with these big corporations who were doing the logging. I was arrested in 1993 for coordinating logging blockades. I was charged with 857 counts of criminal aiding and abetting, and I was facing 6 years in jail because at that point about 857 people had been arrested, they'd been charged, and I was charged as the primary organizer. So I was charged with aiding and abetting all of those criminal offenses. And midway through the year, when we were facing my trial and trying to organize for my trial, my lawyer came to me and he said, you can't talk about this with anyone. And it's, but you need to know that we've been offered a deal. And I said, what do you mean? Offered a deal by who? And he said, well, I can't really say. And in fact, we probably, we never really had this conversation. But you need to know that if you can assure me that there won't be any protests during the Commonwealth Games here in the country, won't be any environmental protests, and that it's very likely that all the charges against you will disappear. And I was so incredibly shocked. First of all, that this really happened. It felt like a movie. Really, this really happens? There are like a couple of people sitting somewhere in their suits in their ivory tower, and they say, move this pawn over here, and then we'll make sure this is okay. And then I was shocked that the government could so misunderstand a movement. Those 900 people who had stood on the road and made that deep personal decision to risk their freedom, as if one person could control them, or all the people who might be planning on protesting the Commonwealth Games. It was a very hard position for a 24-year-old to be in, because I didn't want to go to jail for 6 years. And I also knew, because I was part of the movement and part of the conversations, that there wasn't any protests planned for the Commonwealth Games. So there was a moment where I thought, oh, just tell them. But I was just so disgusted by the whole thing and so horrified by it and the precedent that it would set, that I just said, no, I'm not having this conversation.
I think that'd be an eye-opener for people. The fact that it's not necessarily everything is brokering. It's dealing, right? Even the government operates that way. I think it would come as a surprise to some people.
One of the worst examples that I have ever seen of governments acting on behalf of the interests of major corporations, rather than acting on behalf of the people, is definitely the defense of the Canadian oil sands. Our government in Canada has been traveling the world, shopping for customers for our oil, undermining climate legislation in various countries, in the EU, in the US, lobbying against progress on energy policy in order to ensure that the big oil companies in Canada have a continued market. Now, the argument from the government, if you sit with them, is, well, this creates jobs in Canada, this creates economic revenue, this is the backbone of the country, we're doing it for the people. But what they don't say is that this is the most capital-intensive industry in the country. So every dollar that goes into the oil and gas sector, if that same dollar was spent on any other sector in the country, pick one, it would create more jobs. It would create more revenue. It wouldn't send big profits into the hands of those few people who are controlling the oil sands, but it would create a lot of jobs for Canadians. And that mega project, which is the largest industrial project right now on Earth, the Alberta tar sands, is causing enormous air pollution. It's the single reason that Canada's greenhouse gas emissions are going up instead of down right now. And as a result of that development, we're pumping out about 1.5 billion liters of toxic water into unlined open pits every day. And that toxic water is leaching into people's food systems, leaching into rivers, etc. So is that for the benefit of Canadians in the long term? And again, then the argument is that we need to do that because we're dependent on oil. But we know that we now have the technology today in electrification of transport, in vehicle efficiency legislation, to make better cars that would use less oil, so we wouldn't even need oil from the tar sands. And our government should be looking at that in order to design a system that's going to be better for us, instead of designing a system that supports these current companies and their current industries.
in a personal sense, what are your profound moments where it sort of all came together and made sense, and that commitment to be arrested was the obvious choice to make? I mean, you're from back east, right? It was all conceptual to some degree, right? The whole, even the fact that you didn't even know there's a rainforest in Canada, right? I mean,
yeah, when I first started, yeah.
Yeah, so it was conceptual, the whole eco movement from your experience until you sort of had an experience, right? You experienced something which shifted your knowledge.
You know, I really fell in love with Canada's rainforests. It was, you know, a place that, you know, spoke to me in, you know, where I felt at home in a way that I've never felt before. You know, I was an academic, and I was intellectually interested in what was happening on Canada's west coast. I was interested in the ecology of the rainforest. That's why I came here. And then I fell in love with that place. And when I came back, I think it was the second summer, to continue doing the research that I'd been doing in the rainforest. And the majority of the area that we had been researching had been entirely clear-cut logged. And these are 1,000-year-old trees, you know, as far as the eye could see. And they'd just been completely devastated. A road had been blasted through the waterfall, you know, and pool where we used to swim every morning. And it was just, you know, a trickle of water at the side of the road. And you know, the year before, we had discovered that this endangered seabird was dependent on nesting in this particular place in the old growth. So they had logged everything and left the 1 or 2 trees where we had found nests, which obviously wouldn't survive anymore. And I really felt, for the first time, like I was running in front of the bulldozers. Like the scientific work that I was doing, the academic work, the legal challenges that we were discussing, they were all too slow. You know, that the devastation was too fast. And I heard that there were protests up in the local community up north in Tofino, in Clayoquot Sound, and I decided to join them. I never planned to get arrested. I never planned to engage in civil disobedience, but I thought, well, maybe, you know, I'm a cook. Maybe I can go and cook and learn and just support these people who are taking the stand. And I was so incredibly moved. I mean, this was nurses and doctors and teachers and, you know, just basically standing up together on the road, facing the police and the logging companies and saying, not anymore, enough. And I was so inspired by them that I changed my whole life.
Can you maybe describe that? I was really impressed with your first experience with the rainforest too, because you went sort of in the middle of the night, or you went at night, so you woke up into this old-growth forest, which is an amazing experience, anyways. But that must have been a profound moment, I would imagine. I mean,
God!
That personal experience to me is always a very powerful one. I mean, you know, we hear a lot of people giving us the facts, but I also would like to get personal experiences. And if you could describe your personal experience. Your first personal experience with the rainforest, which sort of was the impetus for your passion afterwards.
Oh, absolutely. I had a really strange experience in getting to know the rainforests on Canada's west coast, because I actually arrived at night. And I was coming to volunteer to do some scientific research with a small group of people who were working in the rainforest. And we arrived at night, and it was completely dark. There was no moon. And it was hot and dusty, and I remember, you know, trying to follow the team leader of the program. He was wearing white runners, and I just remember trying to follow his white runners through the dark as he walked down the trail, and I kept tripping on, you know, sharp objects, and then all of a sudden. The air changed around me. So I couldn't see anything, but the air just changed around me. It was hot, it was dusty, I was tripping over sharp objects, and then all of a sudden it was like I was being held. The air was cooler and really moist, and it smelled amazing. And I was, you know, still on the trail, but the trail was kind of soft and spongy. And so then we're walking through this, still walking, and he says, okay, pitch your tent here. So I had the flashlight out, and all I could really see was a lot of ferns, and, you know, I pitched my tent, went to sleep. And I woke up in the morning and crawled out of my tent, and it was my first experience in the rainforest, because when I'd arrived at night, I couldn't see anything. And I crawled out of my tent and stood up, and there were these ferns. I was standing in ferns that were almost up to my waist. And looking up on these trees that were 300 feet tall. You know, they're the size of 30-story office towers, and you know, some of them are wider than this room. And I didn't even make it up to where the, you know, the root base ends and the tree begins. I have never felt so small and so, you know, insignificant in some ways, like, wow, look at my place as a human in the world, but also, but somehow safe and supported. And you know, it was as close to, I think, a religious experience as, you know, this cynical academic could ever have. And I'll never forget it. You know, the sun was streaming through, there was moss hanging everywhere, there was dew everywhere that was sparkling, and it looked like, I felt like I had walked into, you know, the storybooks of my youth or something. And later that day, I had to go back to the truck to get some equipment, and I went hiking back up through the trail and entered into the clear cut. And that's when I thought, oh, this is what I was walking through. Because in a temperate rainforest, when you walk out of the forest and into an area that's been clear cut, the clear cut has changed the microclimate. It's hot, it's dusty, there was big slash and logs and stumps as far as the eye could see. And I realized that what I had experienced the night before, literally feeling the air change, was the impact of logging on that place.
Cool. Wow. You're great. So maybe you could describe the experience of being in a group of people that are sort of that are defying their society, to be a part of a civil disobedience in a group of people for a cause that everyone is passionate about and believes in. And what's the atmosphere? What's the mood like in an environment like that? Because that was a trailblazing event, right? That was, again, the whole sort of movement in BC and putting attention on logging practices in this province.
I think for a lot of us who were involved in the protests in the early '90s here in Canada, in the what we call the peace camp in the rainforest, it is an experience that we'll never forget, because it was a surprising, completely surprising sense of community and purpose. You know, our goals were very political. We wanted to get as many people as possible to get into the news, to illustrate the problem. You know, we had an analysis. This was one of the tactics. And then people started arriving and started sharing their stories of why they were there. And they were always there for a different reason. You know, there was a logger who pulled up, I'll never forget, who had been a logger all of his life. And he was seeing that we were logging more and more every day, but getting less and less jobs. And he was protesting because he wanted sustainable logging. You know, there was a woman who had just had a baby and from Alberta, and she'd seen me on the news, and she'd pulled up because she realized she didn't want to explain to her children why she hadn't took a stand. You know, and that, you know, and everyone had their story. But regardless of why or how they got to this place, we shared a common sense of purpose. And that common sense of purpose created a strength of community. You know, so you had business people in their suits rolling up their shirt sleeves and you know, putting their hands into the buckets and doing dishes beside, you know, the kid who played guitar in the streets and had more piercings than I can remember. And I'll never forget the experience of just walking around that camp and listening to people's conversations and finding all these people from disparate walks of life connecting and analyzing the issues. And it was, and sharing this deep sense of purpose.
Was that a tough decision to go against society?
Sure. Civil disobedience is always a tough decision, and in my opinion, it should be the last point of call. You know, we had tried so many things. We had tried scientific research, we had tried lobbying the government, we had tried, you know, raising public awareness in other ways, and the logging just continued and it got faster, and then the government announced a decision to log the majority of that rainforest. And so it felt like, you know, it felt like the last chance. It felt like, you know, there was really nothing else we could do in a lot of ways. And it was a terrifically difficult decision and scary. You know, the people who think that this is a decision that's taken lightly, no one takes this lightly. No one's brought up to want to go to jail. And so it was hard. It was really hard. I was terrified of telling my family that this is what I was going to do, that I wasn't just something that was going to happen to me, but that I was, planning on doing it. And they not only came out to find out if I'd lost my mind. They came to the rainforest, but then they ended up sitting on the road too.
Is that because once you experience, was it the community that did it? Was it that they experienced the beauty and the majesty and the awe of an old growth forest?
Both. I mean, I definitely think it was, for a lot of people, it was being inspired by other people willing to take that risk, willing to risk their freedom. And it makes you really do a little bit of soul searching and say, what am I doing? And I think this conversation is even more important today than it was then. We are now racing against the clock globally. It's not just about logging in one region anymore. It's about whether or not we're going to be able to stem catastrophic climate change in time, and how many people are going to be in devastating circumstances if we don't. When I started working on these issues, it was because of a love of the forest and a love of big trees. And today, when we face the impacts of global warming on our economic systems and on our food systems and on the very climate that supports us, it's not an environmental issue anymore. It's the moral challenge of our age. And I think if we're not standing up to oppose that coal plant or to oppose new oil development or to support clean energy systems, then we're going to look back in 2 years and have to account for our time. You said people learn by personal stories, and there was a moment for me when the way that I think about the state of the planet right now completely changed. And it was a couple of years ago on my way to the United Nations climate change negotiations in Copenhagen. And I just happened to be sitting on the plane beside the chief negotiator for Liberia. Just happened to be. And so we started talking, and he said, well, tell me about the status of the issues in your country. What's happening? And I said, well, there's still a bit on the science, but I would say the majority of people understand climate change is happening, but now there's quite a lot of debate about what our role is because we developed the tar sands, and also some people don't like some of the alternatives, wind farms in their backyard or run-of-river operations here in BC. So there's a real debate about the solutions. And he looked at me with the kind of saddest look in his eyes. And he said, he kind of half smile, and he said, that's so nice that you still have that time to have dialogue. In my country, people are dying every day because of climate change, because of the violent storms, because of the floods, because of the droughts, because they're losing their homes. They don't have access anymore to food. So we don't really have time anymore for the discussions. He was kind of less a negotiator than a mourner, almost. And it just stopped me in my tracks, and I started thinking, how is it possible that, we in the developed world, when we know that it's the pollution that we put into the atmosphere over the last 20 years that is killing people already in countries around the world, how is it that that we aren't willing, to do more and act when we know we have the solutions at hand?
So how is it? I guess you discussed that earlier when you said the forces at play.
Mm-hmm.
That 1% or whatever, the famous 1% now, that sort of dictates what happens in the world. I guess they're interested only in their profits.
Well, I think it's a combination of, our inaction is a combination of corporate control over our political systems, over our politicians, over our economies. I think that's definitely
and
true.
Over how we see the world, right?
A small percentage of the people in the world who have a vested interest in making sure we don't move away from coal or oil or, the fossil fuel dependent car. Those are big forces at play. But it's also us and our responsibility, right? We're not making it an election issue. We're not calling up our members of parliament. We somehow think that if we recycle and we make the right choices, we take our cloth bag instead of our plastic bag, or we've reduced our engagement in the world to that of a consumer instead of as a citizen. And as long as we're not actually standing up and showing our politicians that they'll have the support if they make the right changes, but that there will be consequences for their inaction. As long as we're not active in this debate as citizens, then we'll continue to lose ground.
So how do we affect change? Personally, what do we do?
I think that the most important thing for us to recognize is that we don't need better light bulbs, we need better laws. These are huge challenges that will not be solved unless we have strong laws that are going to regulate polluters and bring into play the solutions that we need. And so that means that we need to engage as citizens. So that means organizing. It means being willing to have the tough conversations with your family, with your church group, with your, to organize in your community. It means joining existing environmental groups, funding existing environmental groups. But most important of all, it means engaging with our elected officials. Every time you call your member of parliament, your congressperson, your MP or MLA, every time we call one of them, they assume that there's 100 other people who care, right? This is how they set their agendas. We need to be calling them, we need to be writing them, we need to be, putting up those lawn signs, we need to be making it an issue, especially during an election period, but all the time. And if we're not willing to engage with them, then they will set their priorities by who engages with them. And we know who that is, right? The fossil fuel companies are out-organizing us. Big business is in there engaging with politicians every day, and we're not.
You see, I don't think the general public are aware of how little regulation there is out there. I was under the impression, as a youth, that things were looked after. I don't think people know that it's not. I think that would also influence what's important to people and how they.
No, I think that most people don't realize that the majority of countries in the world don't have basic legislation to ensure that we have clean water or clean air or that we're fighting climate change. And our laws need to change as our information changes, right? And we now know what we're doing to the atmosphere. We know that carbon's being trapped in the atmosphere and it represents a severe threat to us. We now know that there are certain chemicals that we didn't know yesterday that we know today are toxic. And that means that we need to continually be changing that legislation in order to protect us. So I think the most important thing that people can do is to call for stronger laws to protect the air they breathe, the water that they drink, and to reduce global warming pollution.
Yeah, I guess it's hard to get people off their butts, eh? I mean, that same force that makes us dependent on oil also keeps us. But
Occupy is getting people off their butts, right?
It is, yeah.
And I think that's a really good thing.
Actually, I was going to ask you about that. What do you think of the Occupy movement?
I really think that the Occupy movement is one of the greatest signs of hope we've seen in a long time. From what I've seen and experienced, there is a lot of youth engaging. It is, it's protest 2.0 or even farther, right? This is a spontaneous movement that is calling truth to power. And where it actually ends up and how it lands, I don't think we know yet. But I think the fact that it exists alone is now making politicians, rethink how cozy they are to major corporations. Maybe it's making, Obama think, maybe I shouldn't take that 4th meeting with BP this week. It's making people question who is making the decisions about their lives, and in my mind, that can only be a positive force.
It's too bad. Obama could have been the leader of that movement, really. He could have been. Everyone was hoping he would be.
Still might be, as an election coming up.
I suppose, but I don't know. It seems maybe he's caught in the same trap that everybody is. Maybe he's promised a cushy life. I don't know. But
I don't think so. He's between a rock and a hard place because he doesn't have a house that supports him, and he faces, a rise of the Tea Party and the right. So I think. I'm still hopeful.
You're still hopeful? To me, I'd like to see somebody say, you know what, I can't do a damn thing because there's all these forces acting against me. If a president said that, that would be very powerful.
He occasionally does in various ways, actually. He says, help me, you know, and every once in a while he says, you know, help me do the right thing.
Yeah, but it's too
And he's
subtle.
trying
I think we need bold statements.
Yeah,
Just
no,
like
I
Occupy
don't
movement.
disagree.
Well, thank you very much.